All right, understanding the Ruach, the Spirit, part 6. Part 6, the Ruach haKodesh is what we've been studying now for over a month. And again, as we did mention in almost all the parts, I want to just remind us that we need to keep in mind that in this study, we're trying to understand something that's challenging because it's not tangible the way we'd like things to be tangible. We understand things that we can touch or we can see, but this is not something we can touch or see. And so we have to realize that what we're trying to understand, we're just going to do it to the best of our ability with the information that's available in the Word. And as we do this, understand that what I'm trying to bring out as best I can with as minimal amount of bias as possible, what the Word actually says, so it lays it out. But realize that I'm not trying to, and none of us should be seeking understanding or truth to try to match up with what we think is understanding or truth, but we're seeking what it really is. Because I have these conversations on a regular basis every week. Somebody will call or they'll send an email, and they're still filtering through whatever denominational place they came from. And so it's not just about the Ruach. It could be about any of the things that I've taught. And they'll tell me, though, well, I just want the truth. But they search to try to endorse what they already think is the truth. And this is a huge challenge to actually seek truth without bias, truth without preconception, truth without a predisposition. Is that making any sense? That is the real heart of the problem for everybody in searching out the scriptures, is that most of us have had exposure to things in this book before now. Now, if you had had no exposure, this would be a lot easier because you would have no preconceived ideas, no predisposition, no filters. But almost all of you were raised with some sort of understanding of Scripture. And so swimming upstream against that is tough. That's a real strong current that's flowing that you're trying to swim against. So let's try our best to release that stuff and come with an unfiltered readiness for what the Word actually says. Now, today we're going to start with looking much more deeply into what the Ruach haKodesh is. What is the Ruach haKodesh? And we're going to look at it, again, from the point of view, since it's not so tangible and that kind of thing, as to look at how the verses talk about what it does and what its purpose is. So we're going to start by looking at the Spirit, or the Ruach, as Elohim-given knowledge, discernment, and understanding. Okay, this is how Elohim gives you knowledge, discernment, and understanding. We'll look at verses that exemplify this. Let's start in Genesis, in Bereshit. In Genesis chapter 41, Bereshit 41, and in verse 38. Now, to make this a little bit faster, we're not going to read the whole discussion of Yosef interpreting Pharaoh's dream, which is prior to this. But what this is now is Pharaoh's response to hearing Yosef interpret the dream. And so Pharaoh responds in verse 38 and says, and Pharaoh said to his servants, could we find another like him, Yosef, a man in whom is the Spirit of Elohim? So now he sees the Spirit of Elohim in this man. How? What makes him feel like it's there? And verse 39, and then Pharaoh says to Yosef, since Elohim has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. So what he's seeing is Elohim given discernment, wisdom, and understanding, knowledge. Because Yosef has said, look, it's not me that's interpreting, it's what Elohim gives me. And so I'm just a vessel. So, but how is this information given? By the means of this thing we call the Ruach, the Spirit. Okay? Let's continue and look at Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, and in verse 40. Luke chapter 2, in verse 40 it says, and the child, this is Yeshua, grew and became strong in spirit. He became strong in spirit, being filled with wisdom, and the favor of Elohim was upon him. Now, we talked about this a little bit last week and the week before when dealing with the whole Trinity issue. The second member of the Godhead was not filled with the third member of the Godhead. But being filled with Spirit, what did we have as the manifestation of that? He was filled with wisdom. He was filled with wisdom because wisdom came through the Spirit. Now, what did we talk about in the earlier parts of this teaching? That Spirit was the essence or the intrinsic nature of something. So in this case, he was filled with the essence or the intrinsic nature of the Father. And so he was filled with wisdom. It became part of his nature that he was going to now walk in wisdom, to be a wise person. Okay? His nature was filled with this. We talk about, all of this came about because of John saying, I immerse in water, and the one coming is going to immerse you in the Ruach and in fire, right? So we talk about being immersed in, this person was not just wise or had a moment of wisdom or discernment. He was immersed in wisdom. He was filled through the Spirit with wisdom. In this case, we're talking about Yeshua. Now let's go to Ephesians chapter 1. I know we're going to shotgun around a little bit here, but I think that you'll see that, again, we're just trying to hit a bunch of places. Why? Because we want to see multiple witnesses saying the same thing. We saw Joseph described this way. We just saw Yeshua described this way. Okay, so we were in the Tanakh, we were in Genesis, and now we were just now in the Gospel, so we're in Luke. And now we're going to go into the writings of the New Testament in Ephesians, the writings of Paul. In Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 15, for this reason I too, having heard of your belief in the Master Yeshua and your love for all the set-apart ones, do not cease giving thanks for you, making mention of you in my prayers, that the Elohim of our Master Yeshua, Messiah, the Father of esteem, would give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him. Okay, so we're still talking about how the Father transfers to us wisdom, knowledge, discernment, whatever it is. Talents, gifts, skills. It's through this thing called the Ruach. He said that the Elohim of our Master Yeshua, the Father of esteem, would give you a Ruach, a spirit, an intrinsic nature of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him. He wants your whole nature to know and have revealed to you Yeshua. That you would have him revealed to you in his fullness. And we've talked about that fullness being that he is truth, that he is life, that he is the light of the world, that he is the walking, talking, living Torah, that he is the Word. And so here, he's saying, look, that he's praying that the people that are his students here, his disciples, that they would be filled with the spirit of wisdom and revelation and knowledge of him, that the eyes of your understanding being enlightened as a result of this filling of the Spirit, so that you know what is the expectation of his calling and what are the riches of the esteem of his inheritance in the set-apart ones. So the purpose of the Spirit is to give you a deeper revelation and understanding of what his, Yeshua's, purpose was and is, and his calling is, and his inheritance is, so that you can understand how it relates to you. Where do you fit into all of that? He says, so that you would understand and that you would be enlightened. Remember, he's the light of the world. He's the one that brings light to you. He is light, and so he enlightens, he makes clear, he shines and shows on what is happening, what the deal is. And what the deal here that he's talking about is what? His riches, his calling, and his inheritance. Verse 19. And what is the exceeding greatness of his power toward us who are believing according to the working of his mighty strength, which he wrought in the Messiah when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenlies. So this is what it's all about. The Ruach is to teach us about this so we can understand what has been done with Yeshua and how that relates to us and how it affects us. And then because of what Yeshua did and what his calling is, what is expected of us. See, I think a lot of times that's a lot of the struggle that human beings have is, well, what does he, the one who created us, expect? And I think this is a big confusion that you see in the body, because you're going to get a very different answer from a Christian than from a Jew, from a Messianic, you ask different people, you're going to get different stuff. What does he expect of us? You know, when Moses was asked that question in Deuteronomy chapter 10, Moses pointed that. That's not in my notes, but we're going to go there anyway, because after all, this is the Ruach. By the way, remember what I told you the Ruach does? Is one of the main things the Ruach does is what? Bring to remembrance that which is already in there. So here I am talking about expectation. What does the Creator expect of us? So naturally, what verse should come to your mind? Come on. Deuteronomy 10:12. You guys have heard that from me so much. I haven't mentioned it in a while, so now you guys are slipping. Deuteronomy 10:12, where Moses says, and now Israel, what is Yahweh your Elohim asking of you? See, there it is. Moses knows that we're asking that question. Paul just said that through the Ruach we should have greater understanding, our eyes being enlightened, so that we can know the expectation of his calling, so that we can know the expectation of our calling. It says he calls us. And so what does Moses say? He says that Yahweh says, what is Yahweh asking of you? He says, but to fear him, to fear Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve him with all your heart and with all your being, and to guard the commandments of Yahweh and his laws, which are for your good. That's Deuteronomy 10:12. That's it right there in a nutshell. Deuteronomy 10:12. What does Yahweh expect? This is what he wants you to do. He wants you to fear him, to walk in his ways, to love him, serve him, and guard his commands. And he doesn't want you to just do that sloppily or partially, with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength. That's what he expects of you. Is that a lot? Oh yeah, you betcha that's a lot. That's everything. But let me think. He's offering you everything. So what do you think he expects? He's offering you eternal life. He's offering you an inheritance beyond inheritances that you could ever imagine. Well, you bet he's expecting a lot for that. He expects a lot out of you. Don't you do that with your children? Your children want a bunch of stuff. Don't you expect some things out of them if they're going to get it? Well, I don't mind giving that to you, but I expect. I expect that you listen, that you guard my commands, that you love me, that you respect and fear and honor me as your father, right? Or mother, or whatever you're as a parent. We have expectations. But the problem is we've become a very enabled, spoiled, entitled people. So we expect, but we don't expect to have to do anything for it. We just expect. I expect eternal life. I expect blessing. I expect intervention and protection. I expect healing. I expect, you do expect all that stuff. He expects some stuff too. That's why all this stuff is predicated on him saying things like, if you do this, then I shall do that. So in other words, you can expect this, this, and this. All these blessings and all these things, if you do this, this, and this. By the way, you can also expect all these cursings if you do that, that, and that. So he tells you what you can expect. But he also tells you what he expects in return. Okay? So here we have in Ephesians, Paul talking about these things. Now let's go to chapter 3 of Ephesians, and we're going to read about this a little bit more. In chapter 3, we're going to read pretty much the whole chapter. Because of this, I, Shaul, am prisoner of Yeshua Messiah on behalf of you Gentiles. If indeed you have heard of the administration of the favor of Elohim that was given to me for you, that by revelation was made known to me the secret, as I wrote before briefly. In reading this, then, you are able to understand my insight into the secret of Messiah, which was not made known to the sons of men in other generations, as it has been revealed by the Spirit to his set-apart emissaries and prophets. Now, bear in mind that, listen to how he's playing this out here. He said, which was not made known to the sons of man in other generations. It doesn't say that nobody in the other generations knew. He says this was not made known on a large scale to the sons of men in other generations, as it has now been revealed by the Spirit to his emissaries and prophets. In other words, the prophets always understood. And they tried to reveal some of this stuff. People weren't listening. But now we're talking about the apostles and the prophets, a much more large-scale endeavor. Back in the days of the prophets, there was usually not more than one or two of them running around at the same time. Okay, occasionally there was more than one, but not much more than one or two at the same time. Here you not only have the foundation of the prophets that wrote, that we have all of their writings, but you have dozens of emissaries, shluchim, okay, a shaliach or an apostle, people that are sent out with a message. Sent ones. I mean, you have for sure the 12, okay? And then you have the 70, and you have the 120, all being mentioned, being trained by Yeshua. So that's a whole lot more people doing a work. Now, if anything this compares to, it compares somewhat to Moses and his 70 elders at his time. But never again do you see from Moses forward that large amount of people being sent out to try to do anything to a body of people. But just like in Moses' day, this is very similar in the apostles' days. There was a body that had become ignorant that needed to be taught. And so the 3 million or so that Moses was working with was very similar to the millions or thousands and thousands in these different towns adding up together to millions that the apostles are going to work with. And so there was a need for this large ministry. By the way, we need that now too. There's a huge need for that now. But in order to do that, what do you see happening in the scripture that we don't have now? Well, let's see. Moses trained up his guys. You see, Yeshua trained up his guys, so to speak. I mean, everybody's going to argue. I'm going to email saying now, well, Yeshua trained them all back then. I know that, but you understand what I'm trying to say. The teaching, the hands-on teaching done in the flesh, Moses did, then the 70 did. Here, Yeshua did hands-on when he was in the flesh, and then the apostles. We need that now. We need to have yeshivot, as we can call it, yeshivas designed and set up where teaching can be done, because there's a terrible lack of teaching being done to those before they're out there doing their own teaching. We've got teachers who are untaught, untrained, uneducated, or I shouldn't say uneducated, only fractionally educated. But you should all know that having partial information gets you in trouble a lot. Okay? Incomplete information will get you in trouble a lot. And so this is what you're hearing often from the teachers you're listening to, because they were not trained and they're giving you partial information just as much as they understand how they understand it. And often filtered through wherever they came from, Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, doesn't matter. Whatever it is, that's where they're coming from. Okay? Now, I know there's like 75 other denominations that I never mentioned. I was never in any of them. I'm familiar with some of these ones that we run into very often locally, so those are the ones I mentioned. Please don't think I'm picking on those 3. I mean, we could pick on the other 75 as well if you'd like. It's not the point. The point is they're filtering through wherever they came from, wherever that was. Okay? Now, you can say Judaism as well, but there's so many fewer of those guys out there, so I don't usually mention that. But yes, there are those that are teaching that are being filtered through the Judaism as well. So I don't want to leave that out in the mix here, because it's certainly an issue. But so understand what he's talking about. He says, look, this is not made known to the sons of men in other generations. He's not saying nobody knew. He said it wasn't made known in sort of a wide, full spectrum like was happening now in his time. He says the Gentiles to be co-heirs. This is the point. What was not made known? People say, oh, well, they didn't know about Yeshua. And this. No, he said, look, this is the secret. This is what I'm talking about. That's why I started at the beginning of the chapter. I could have jumped further down, but see here, he says, the secret I'm talking about is that the Gentiles were to be co-heirs, united in the same body, and partakers together in the promise of Messiah through the good news. That was the secret that was not revealed in other generations at any large scale. The prophets hinted at it. Lots of them did. If you ever listened to the teaching I did called The Identity of Israel, Past, Present, and Future, we show that the prophets did talk about that the Gentiles would be coming in. Look, the promise to Abraham. Abraham was told, you will be the father of many goyim. Many nations. You'll be the father of many nations, Gentiles. And so the understanding of what Yahweh meant when he said that was what was lacking. People then didn't understand. Now it's being revealed through the Brit Chadashah, through the teachers in the New Testament, where they're revealing and saying, look, this is what it was talking about right here. We're bringing the Gentiles in as co-heirs and partakers of the promises. And by the way, as coming in, let's understand, they're coming in, they're joining in, they're grafting in. All of those statements, all of those phrases have implicitly in them the idea that something already exists that you're coming a part of, that you're becoming a part of. In other words, you have being preached out there every Sunday some idea that they need to come join the Christians. The Jews need to come to them. Everybody needs to come to... No, you're going to the existing thing that existed before. You're the newcomers. Romans 11, the tree, grafting into the existing tree. The secret is that you can be in that covenanted group. Now, it also says that there were members of that covenanted group that were broken off of the tree because they didn't keep it. So there's no sort of like, well, they were born into it, so they just sort of can skate all the way into the kingdom. All right, it doesn't work that way. But realize what he's saying here is that here's the secret, is that the Gentiles can be co-heirs united in the same body with who? The ones that were already heirs. There already have to be heirs for you to be joined into. And then be partakers together in what? The promise in Messiah through the good news. And by the way, the good news, and I've said this many times, we're going to do a teaching on it at some point, is not just the good news that Yeshua was born in the flesh, died, was buried, was resurrected on the third day, and now sits at the right hand. Although that's really good news. The good news has to do with things like this, that the Gentiles can come in, that there's a regathering of the lost Israelites. That was the good news that the people at that time were waiting to hear. But you're not going to hear that in church. Because the church just wants to tell you the good news has to do with Messiah only. No, it has to do with Messiah fully. You hear the difference? They want to say it's about Messiah only, meaning the way they understand him starting 2,000 years ago. I want to tell you the good news is about Messiah fully. Him as Yahweh, him as Torah giver, him as the walking, talking Torah, him as light, him as life, him as the truth. That good news has to do with Yeshua fully. Is that making more sense? As opposed to just Yeshua in this recent manifestation, which is what they focus on. They're not understanding the fullness of Messiah. How can you, if he's the walking, talking Torah and your whole main part of your gospel is that the Torah was done away with and nailed to the cross? You've missed the point clearly. And you can't be co-heirs of people that keep Torah and say that now that we're co-heirs with you, we're going to do away with the foundation of what you have. The core of the covenant that makes you an heir is Exodus 19. That is the core of the covenant of heirship, of being an heir. He says, if you obey, I will take you as my people. That is the core essence, simplified, Reader's Digest version, whatever, of the covenant. So the heir that H-E-I-R, Ephesians is hearing Paul talk about it. The group in Ephesus is hearing here is to be co-heirs of what? The promises of Exodus 19. The promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The promises of peopleship. Being an accepted people. To be called children of the living Elohim. There's an if, though. To be co-heirs, you have to accept the covenant. The covenant had to do with Torah observance. Submission to authority. His authority. And doing it with all your strength, with all your being, with all your might. This is the good news, by the way. Now, in verse 7, he says, of which I became a servant. Getting this good news out there, he says, of which I became a servant according to the gift of the favor of Elohim given to me according to the working of his power. How? Verse 5 said, being revealed by the Ruach. Now, if you had just read this through the New Testament, through Christian teaching and the church teaching, you may have thought, well, that's because the Ruach is a being who came and knocked on your shoulder and said, hey, I got to tell you something. But if you read this, that we read in Genesis and in Luke, by the way, and we're going to read in other places, that information and wisdom and inspiration given by the Ruach is inspired in those that did not feel that they ever interacted with a being. It's the method, the transferring energy, power. Remember, we're not able to process this thing that we can't touch and grab a hold of. But the way that, look, if I want to give Marty information, I can write him an email, I can hand him a piece of paper, I can walk over and talk to him. But if Elohim wants to give Marty information, he has the Ruach. That's the way he can communicate directly to him. He's not going to send him an email. He's not going to send him a letter. He's not going to walk over. Generally, in most cases, we don't see him walking over and just talking to people. Only a few have ever had that experience, although lots of people may claim that. But scripturally, you don't see but a few. But yet through the Ruach, you see him speaking to a lot of people and inspiring understanding, revelation, and wisdom and discernment comes through this thing called the Ruach. Okay? Now, so continuing in verse 8, he says, to me, the very least of all the set-apart ones, this favor was given to bring the good news of the unsearchable riches of Messiah among the Gentiles. Okay, so now we're getting more details about the good news. The good news is the unsearchable riches of Messiah. That's a whole lot more than just saying, hey, by the way, this Messiah came and he died and was resurrected, and now that provides a possibility of eternal life for you. It's so much more. He's saying it's the unsearchable riches of Messiah. And what do we study all the time? We're studying the Word to understand Him and what He's doing and what His plans are for us, because it's almost completely unsearchable for us to ever get it all. I mean, the more we study, the more we realize there's more to study. So we can agree with this idea of it being unsearchable riches. Riches, not that you can't, but that you'll never exhaust the ability to keep getting more. Okay? He's saying that this is something that is bottomless. You can just keep going and going. There'll always be more. He trained his own guys for a few years, and then still at the end, he had to open up their minds to understand what the verses had to say about him. That's after private training by himself. I mean, you know, you can't get a better teacher. The teacher taught them privately, day in, day out, 24/7 for a period of time, and yet still they needed to have him to open up their minds to understand. Now, how did he do that? With the Ruach. It's through the power and the means by which that the Ruach is that he opened up their minds to understand something. Isn't that consistent with everything we're reading so far? He didn't have another being come over and tutor them. A third entity of some sort. He opened their minds, and how did he do that? Through the Ruach, through this power, through this, whatever. I always call it the means by which. It's the means by which he did it. I don't know what else to call it. It's just how he did something, so I call it the means by which he did it. You people want to call it a power? I don't know if that does it justice. Whatever you want to call it will not do it justice. Can we agree on that? We're trying to quantify and qualify something that's above and beyond us, so whatever we call it is going to not do it justice. So I simply call it's how he does it. I don't know what else to say. It's just how he does it. So continuing here, in verse 9, he says, and to make all see how this secret is administered, which for ages past has been hidden in Elohim, who created all through Yeshua Messiah. So now he's trying to show something that really was not clear, even in the Old Testament, how this secret would be administered. What secret? The secret that the Gentiles could be grafted in, that they could be co-heirs. But see, now in the Brit Hadashah, we see how this actually will be administered. How does this work? How is the process? And Paul is actually actively doing this process as he's going to the nations and the Gentiles and showing them how they could become partakers and co-heirs. He says, so that now bear in mind that as I'm reading this, the Christian church will tell you things like, well, this was not made to known to the other generation. So everything we know was secret. They didn't know anything and blah, 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 blah. No, the problem, what they didn't know was that there was not a large-scale understanding that the Gentiles could come in. And what definitely wasn't understood was the process. The administration of this idea. How was this going to happen? So now that it is happening, Paul's saying, now I can explain it to you. See here, look, watch, this is how it's happening. He says, so that now through the assembly, the many-sided wisdom of Elohim might be known to the principalities and authorities in the heavenlies, according to the everlasting purpose, which he made in Messiah Yeshua our Master, in whom we have boldness and access with reliance through belief in him. I pray, therefore, that you do not lose heart at my pressures on your behalf, which is your esteem. For this reason I bow my knees to the Father, our Master, Yeshua Messiah, from whom all fatherhood in the heavens and earth is named. Okay, now, you notice what he says here is, I bow my knees to the Father. Now, worthy is the Lamb, no doubt. But the Lamb and others understood that we bow down to the Father. Okay, Christianity has gotten fully shifted now that everything is just focused on the Son and worshiping the Son and bowing to the Son. And the Father is not completely out of the mix, but gets second standing mostly. And I don't think I'm exaggerating that, okay? And so here's Paul making clear, because of all of this focus on Messiah that he said in these previous verses, he says, because of all of that, I bow my knees to the Father of our Master Yeshua, in order that he might give you, according to the riches of his esteem by power, to be strengthened in the inner man. How? Through his Spirit. So his Spirit is to strengthen the inner man. In what purpose? In walking out this covenanting and becoming a co-heir, this partaking as a co-heir. Because you know what? Once you choose this path, you're a target. You're a target, and you need to understand that there's going to be a challenge. And so you have to decide, have you counted the cost? Are you willing to pay the price? Yeshua has mentioned it, and as well as the apostles mentioned, that you need to understand that you will suffer as he suffered. Are you willing to suffer as he suffered? He said, look, that Messiah, listen now, in order that, we'll go back to verse 16, in order that he might give you, according to the riches of his esteem, by power to be strengthened in the inner man through his Spirit, through the Ruach, that the Messiah might dwell in your hearts. Remember, he said in John 14, I am coming to you, the Spirit of truth, the Spirit of Yeshua. So this is how Messiah dwells in your hearts, through the Ruach, through belief, having become rooted and grounded in love, in order that you might be strengthened to firmly grasp with all the set-apart ones what is the width and length and depth and height. Now, the key part of this phrase here is with who? The set-apart ones. So what does the kadosh ones mean? These are ones who have chosen to set themselves apart to be kadosh as your heavenly Father is kadosh. Be set apart as Yahweh is set apart. In other words, you need to do what he says to do and not do what he says not to do. So he's saying, if you want to be included in all of this, you're including yourself in those that have chosen to set themselves apart from the world and choose to be a part of the kingdom of Elohim that's being set up. And then once you understand that's your purpose, then you're going to try to figure out what is the width and the length and the depth and the height. In other words, how do I do this? When do I do it? How much do I do? Who do I do it with? You know what I'm saying? In other words, all those little details, the mechanics. And this is now leads into verse 19. To know the love of Messiah, which surpasses knowledge, in order that you might be filled to all the completeness of Elohim. And to him who is able to do exceedingly above what we ask or think, according to the power that is working in us, to him, to who? The one who is willing to do above and beyond. For all you minimalists out there, you're not in this verse. Paul is not talking to you. He said, to those who are maximalists, be the esteem and the assembly by Messiah Yeshua unto all generations. To those who are willing to go above and beyond even what Paul's talking about. And so absolutely, I'm going to put a hard stop on this. Stop asking what the minimum is you need to be doing. Stop trying to figure out how to do less. Stop trying to figure out I just wanted to figure out, Rabbi, how much of the Old Testament actually transfers into the New. All of it. Stop trying to get out of it. Okay? And the whole Melchizedekian, Book of the Law, Book of the Covenant guys out there trying to minimalize, saying the stuff you don't have to do, that's a minimalist attitude. Because by the time you get to Deuteronomy 28 and all the other verses in Deuteronomy, including 10:12, all of that stuff that came after the golden calf was already given. And he said that all that stuff brings life. Moses tells us through that. Yahweh told Moses to tell you that that's the good stuff, that he wants you to walk in all his ways, not just the stuff before the golden calf. Okay, that whole teaching is absurd. That somehow that stuff was against you. No, everything after that part of Exodus chapter 24, wherever it's, they say that's where it starts, 21, 24, I think, that everything after that was against you, the laws that were against you. No, everything after that, including the reiteration of the covenant in Deuteronomy, which is the actual kind of short version of the whole covenant, Deuteronomy. Okay, it's actually written like a legal document. If you go to the ancient Near East, studies and you go back and see how legal documents are written, it's written in the form of a legal document. In that legal document, he says things like the Shema. And the V'ahavta, where he says, and you are to love Yahweh with all your heart, with all your being, and you are to obey and do all that he says. That comes after all of that stuff that these guys are trying to wipe out of the Bible and say, that was nailed to the cross. You know why? Because they want to be minimalist and they don't want to do everything they're told to do. And then we have, unfortunately, people in the body buying into this. And now they're in trouble. Okay, I promise you something. I can guarantee something. I'm going to make a guarantee. I'm going to make a promise. All right? And I can stand on this, and I'm going to take this risk. And you're not supposed to say these things and make promises. I promise you that if you do more than what he says to do, you can't get in trouble. But if you do less, you might be in a lot of trouble. So if you're not sure, if you're going to listen to some ministry trying to say that some section of what Yahweh said to do is no longer necessary, you're putting yourself at risk. Doing it will never get you in trouble, although Christianity disagrees because they'll say that you're mocking Yeshua, this and that and the other thing, if you do what was said to be done. No, you're mocking Yeshua if you don't do it. You're mocking his death, burial, and resurrection. He died because we broke it, so now we're mocking him by continuing to break it? Satan has really deceived the whole world because that's insanity. I mean, that's just insane, irrational thought. There's no logic in that. Okay. So here's the deal, all right? I know that you got a speeding ticket, all right? And I'm going to go and pay your speeding ticket for you. Are you now free to speed? Because after all, I paid your ticket. I intervened for you. I took that on me. I took the hit. I went in and pled guilty for you, and I took the hit. They gave me the ticket. I took your ticket away. So now are you free to speed? Of course not. But that's the kind of logic that you're getting out of the mainstream, is that because he died, now you can do all these things that he said you can't do. Makes no sense. It's irrational. Okay? But here what Paul's saying is, look, in the end of the chapter, he says, and to him who is able to do exceedingly above what we ask or think, according to the power that is working in us, to him be esteemed. So he's able to do exceedingly above what we ask, but we also need to do above and beyond. Isn't that what it means with all your heart, with all? Is there any confusion with that? All. How about the verses where it talks about doing your utmost? Anybody remember there's a few verses where he talks about giving your utmost, doing your utmost? Stop being minimalists. Stop trying to figure out how to do less. Remember the servant that did just what he was told? What was he called? Right? There was no praise for that guy. He was a useless servant, wasn't he? He was expected to be a good servant. You do above and beyond. You go beyond what is expected. But you can't go beyond unless you're already doing at least what you know is expected. You have to do at least the minimum is to it's your minimum service to do what he tells you to do. I don't know why this is so complicated for people, but apparently it is. Let's go now to Shemot, to Exodus chapter 28. Hopefully we saw that in Ephesians that all of these things were given through the Spirit, the understanding, the revelation, the wisdom, the encouragement, the strengthening of the inner man, all through the Ruach. And now we're going to Exodus chapter 28. And in verse 3. Now, there's some times that you see as once they came out of Egypt where there needed to be those who had special gifts and talents to do certain things. And look what it says here in chapter 20 and verse 3. It says, and you speak to all the wise of heart whom I have filled with a spirit of wisdom, and they shall make the garments of Aaron, and to him to set him apart for him to serve as my priest, as a priest to me. So there are people who are filled with the spirit of wisdom in specific things. Not just wisdom in general, but some people are filled with wisdom on how to play an instrument, or how to make garments, or how to build a tabernacle, or how to fix your plumbing, or how to do surgery, or how to teach school, or how, whatever, right? They're filled with wisdom in an area. Because sometimes people feel, oh, but I don't have any wisdom in an area, so I'm just dumb. No, you might be smart and wise in a different area. We're not all given that above and beyond exceptional understanding or wisdom in every area of life. Okay? Trust me, you don't want me doing any work on your car. I'm not terrible at it. I just don't have any idea how to do any of it. I have not been filled with the wisdom. But you know people that seems like out of the womb they were fixing cars. Okay? They just somehow have a knack to just do it. Okay? And so here he's talking about that. We have another one in verse, we'll go to chapter 31. You see the same idea. We're still in Exodus, Shemot 31, Exodus 31. And in verse 1, Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, see, I have called by name Betzalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Yehudah, and I have filled him with the spirit of Elohim, Oh, so now it's even called the Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of Elohim, in wisdom and in understanding and in knowledge and in all work. To do anything? No. To make designs for work in gold and silver and bronze, and in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood to work in all the work. But he's saying that this is not just any spirit, or he says, this is the Spirit of Elohim. I filled with the Spirit of Elohim. So in other words, I use this means by which to give him and transfer to him a talent and wisdom and understanding and knowledge in a very specific area. Okay? And I'm going to say something, and maybe somebody will take this as egomaniac or they'll take it as humble. It doesn't matter to me. It's just, it is what it is. You guys hear me teach, and you hear me understand the word. You hear me disseminate what I understand in the word. Okay? And some of you struggle to see what I see and do what I do because you're not. I was given this gift and this talent to do what I do. So I don't know how I do it. It's not something that I worked for thousands of years, whatever, to develop this particular skill. It's him giving me an insight, a wisdom, a discernment. Now, it's not to say I don't work at it, but I didn't have to work to get the wisdom and discernment. I have to work to use that wisdom to put something together, just like this guy was going to have to use it to make things out of gold or silver or bronze. Just having the wisdom wasn't going to make something manifest all of a sudden, into existence that, hey, look, it's already built. He was now going to have to take his understanding and do the work. So I take my understanding and I do the work. I get into the Word. I study. I start piecing the verses together as He has given me the gift and talent to do. So I'm just using me as an example of what this is talking about. I believe that that's the work of the Ruach. That the Ruach transfers that talent to me. As it transfers talents to Marty to play bass, my daughter to sing, Shira to play keyboard, whatever. All of you have your talent. Okay, so whatever that talent is, and I may not know what your talent is. Maybe you haven't sat down long enough to find out and to talk about it and find out that, wow, you've got a real talent in an area. Some of you have sat down and tried to talk to somebody and whatever, and just it was a struggle. Others of you, there's certain people that you just sat down and met. From the minute you met them, it was just so easy to talk to them. There was a natural flow. Some people have a gift that they can just sit down and talk to anybody. I think that's a great gift. But I think that's also a spirit-given discernment and wisdom to learn how to sit and talk to various people who have come from various places, and somehow you're able to just do that and automatically connect with them. That's a terribly important gift and talent. The body really needs people with that. So don't diminish and think, well, I don't have any special gifts. Yes, you do. You just haven't figured out what it is. You need somebody maybe to talk to you and say, by the way, this thing that you do so well, that's it right there. And don't diminish the value that somebody will benefit from that gift. All of you have some sort of gift or talent Ruach has given you. The Father has given you through the Ruach that benefits others, and you may take it for granted, not realizing, because it maybe is not very glamorous. It may not be something that's so openly visible to people. Some of you are incredible prayer warriors, so to speak. You pray for people. And you just do it naturally. It's in you to do that for people. It's not something where you say, oh, yeah, I know I'm supposed to pray for people. No, you just automatically do it. It's something that you just naturally flow into. That's a terribly important gift. And yet, at the same time, it's not something that everybody would necessarily know you're doing. So the visibility of it is not the point. Here we're seeing, again, the Spirit of Elohim being given to do what? In wisdom and understanding and knowledge, to do something. In this case, to work with things like gold, silver, wood, stone, etc. Truly, fascinating and incredible things. Incredible things. I'm looking at the clock and I'm looking where I want to go next. Give me 1 second to just look at this verse here to see if I want to go there now or this is what we'll stop. We may stop early today. Let me just see if that's what I want to deal with here. Yeah, you know what? We are going to stop here. Wow, you guys got off easy this week. Because I want to start this other section next week because I've got a big thing that I want to get into next week. So with that, I want to just kind of wrap together today. Hopefully we're starting to see that with the Ruach, as we're understanding it more and more, that it's the way that the Father transfers and instills in you that which He wants to transfer and instill in you. Whether it's wisdom, whether it's strengthening the inner man, discernment, revelation, understanding, knowledge. I mean, these words almost sound like, synonyms because they mean similar things to some degree. But it's the way that that is transferred to you. Because remember, no one comes unless the Father draws. Well, how does he draw you? He transfers into your mind an understanding that you're missing something, and you start to seek. He transfers into your mind that something's not right, that needs to get fixed, and you need an answer. You start to search. He transfers into your mind something that itches that you can't scratch, and you start to look to get that worked out. And then he leads you through maybe divine connections, where he put you in touch with somebody and connected the dots with you interacting with somebody, or he led somebody by inspiring them to share a teaching with you. Or somehow you just were randomly on the internet, I hear this all the time, and somehow, boom, a teaching came up, was exactly what you needed. You're on YouTube or somewhere and just whatever, or just were inspired to do a word search in Google for something you never really thought why you were searching for that, and next thing you know, you found what you were looking for. It's a transferring of that to you. That's how he draws. And it says, we've read this in the Do You Know the Father and the Son teaching, that it's the Father that reveals the Son and the Son that reveals the Father. How? Through the Ruach. That is how they transfer that information to you. Through the Spirit. So hopefully this is starting to clear up more and more, little by little, this strangely difficult thing to understand called the Ruach haKodesh, or the Spirit. And so we're going to continue this journey next week, and let's go before the Father now as we close this teaching. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Father, we come before you to truly seek an understanding, to ask that you would transfer to us a discernment, a wisdom, and understanding, that you would reveal to us through your Spirit exactly what your Spirit's all about. We need the Spirit to reveal the Spirit. And so, Father, this is such a challenging thing for us three-dimensional or four-dimensional human beings. We have length and width and height and time dimensions, but yet these things like the Ruach that are outside of those dimensions are so challenging to us. So what do? We rely on you, which I know is the way you designed the system, so that we'd have to rely on you. If we didn't have to rely on you, we'd think we were so smart, we'd try to figure out everything ourselves. So thank you for forcing us to rely on you, forcing us to come to you, forcing us to go before you and to ask and to seek and to knock because we have need, because we have questions, because we have itches we can't scratch, because we have been drawn to look and to seek after you. Even if we didn't know what we were seeking after, now we know we were seeking after you. So, Father, strengthen our inner man through the Ruach. Grant us wisdom and understanding and revelation and discernment and knowledge of you, the true living Elohim, and your Son, Yeshua, our Messiah, our high priest sitting at your right hand, our soon-coming King of Kings. Father, help us to truly understand the fullness of Yeshua and to embrace what you have sent him to do, and to understand the fullness of the good news that you present and offer to us, and the opportunity to become heirs together with those of promise, of the promises of eternal life and a life in the kingdom forever with you. Father, we come to you now asking these things, coming before you very humbly and respectfully, giving you glory and you honor in the name above all names, Yeshua Meshikenu. Amen v'amen.